Joe Biden has called people that disagree with him semi-fascists. Does this mean that the left are through with even pretending to care? Hello there, you 5.8 million awakening wonders. Thank you for joining me on this voyage towards truth, a truth that is already within you in the form of limitless light, connected to all reality there's ever been and ever could possibly be. Turn on that notification bell right now in case the algorithm is against us, and please subscribe. We're desperate to nudge this thing right up into 6 million for reasons that don't really make sense to me and probably amount to simple vanity. Hey, did you hear that Joe Biden called the MAGA movement semi-fascist the other day? Now, whether or not you're a Trump supporter, and I'd have to say that I'm not a Trump supporter. You lot, I know, really love him. Me, that's not my bag. But I certainly don't think you should be calling civilians of your own country of which you are president semi-fascist unless they literally are genocidal, racist maniacs. And I personally believe that when you start to talk about people that you disagree with in contemptuous terms, that is the kind of end of civility, the end of reasonable hope for a better political future. I spoke to Max Blumenthal from the Grayzone. We talked about the left and its demise and how the left used to be about representing ordinary people against powerful establishment elites. What has happened to the left? Whether you consider yourself to be right-wing, left-wing, or beyond all political systems of identification, let me know in the comments below what you think. You'll be very interested in this conversation about the shifting sands of politics and how we need to create a new political movement that is supportive of all Americans.
20 years ago, it's like, I feel like you would have been working at the New York Times as a sort of a radical lefty journalist, and I would have been Jane Fonda. You know what I mean? It was like these were sort of like figures that the mainstream could sort of accommodate as slightly alternative critics of the establishment. But now, like, it's like these like we're conspiracy theorists, persona non grata, forbidden, cannot speak out. No one's willing to talk about the complexity of you being critical of Israel and what that sort of suggests in terms of where that would place you politically, and that you've written it, like, you know, about George Bush. It's just that they have to find labels that legitimize this person cannot speak. Like, you know, we'll just have to, what would mean you can't listen to this person? Well, you have to find some taboo subject to associate that person with. Bang! Now that person can't speak anymore.
Yeah, there's always some label, Russian disinformation or anti-vax. That's like something you hear. You're an anti-vaxxer if you dare criticize Fauci or the lockdowns. And I remember getting into journalism I know a lot more now. I'd probably say I'm more red-pilled. Maybe I'm just more disillusioned and angry 20 years later. But at the time I had this idea that, maybe I can like write for Rolling Stone someday, like Rolling Stone. Cause I remembered, Rolling Stone was a countercultural publication. It was publishing dispatches from the field in Vietnam, exposing, Nixon and Reagan and Iran-Contra. And you had, all sorts of magazines that were in wide circulation doing many of the same things we're doing at the Grayzone. Now you look at Rolling Stone, all it does is attack people who threaten the establishment, smear even minor figures, and then publish disinformation about entire hospital wings full of people who overdosed on ivermectin, like fake stories. And, what the formerly countercultural legacy publications do, Mother Jones is another one, or Democracy Now!, where Aaron Mate used to work, is they're doing the work of the establishment, but in a more insidious way than The Economist could do, because they're associated with the left and the counterculture. It's so disgusting.
Yeah. I like what Glenn Greenwald, like, he's like, after you'd think that, you're a Pulitzer Prize winning, like, that's it, hero for life, the Snowden stuff. But now, like, married to a man. What do you, like, this is not what a conventional right-wing conspiracy theorist looks like, but that's sort of what you hear. Like, I'm sort of astonished that it's happened. And I suppose it comes down to sort of, as you say, ideas around class, metropolitan, sort of kind of comfort, like, when you give the example of the Rolling Stone, it's just, I guess the Rolling Stone, if we were to look at how that's owned, how that's funded, it would become pretty plain that they're not going to start publishing stuff that threatens those interests. And I suppose that's where corporatism and monopolization ultimately create a homogeneity of opinion, because you cannot, now that there is the availability of information, i.e. through the media that you and I are talking through, the potential, frankly, exists to create global unrest, to create global solidarity to create movements where working people of all colours and forms of identification could come together against our common enemy, not in some sort of statist communist model, but a decentralised, sort of a more syndicalist version of democracy. Well, democracy is the word. You run your own communities, you run your own schools. That's sort of plausible now. It's technologically plausible. It's ideologically plausible. It's only implausible because of the level of resistance and the forces that, oppose it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also about sovereignty, that many people want to be able to make decisions on a national basis.
Right.
And so you have right wingers who make that argument. They don't want Bill Gates and the World Health Organization or, the World Economic Forum, which is the global thought leader for transnational capitalism, coming in and deciding what policy should be grafted on by their local lawmakers. But then you also have socialist-oriented countries like Venezuela or Nicaragua trying to take their own path in the face of imperial demands. And, I actually just, in these countries have interesting models that can be learned from. I just interviewed the Nicaraguan version of Anthony Fauci. I interviewed her actually in February, but we just published it at the Grayzone. She's the top advisor to Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega of the socialist-oriented Sandinista Front. And she and her other public health experts in Nicaragua refused to lock down. They actually didn't seek to exert that same level of control over the population through lockdown, because so much of their constituency in the Sandinista Front are just informal workers who work in the street or who are campesino poor farmers. And if they're locked down, they starve to death. So they at least took into account the needs of their population, and they were brutally attacked through the World Health Organization and by corporate Latin American media. So there's very blurry lines here on what actually constitutes left or right, but so many people across the world are just fighting for the right to make decisions that are right for their own society, whether they're in a socialist society or not. And what I feel in the U.S., and especially within the U.S. left, is that as these lines increasingly blur, and you see people who are considered like right-wing kooks, like this representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, denounce the FBI or denounce sending $40 billion to Ukraine. And then you see self-identified socialist lawmakers like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the members of this like de facto progressive boy band known as the Squad, when they are voting for the $40 billion to Ukraine.
Wow.
And they are voting to expand the Capitol Police and the security state's budget, voting for the department to fund the Department of Homeland Security, and violating all their campaign promises, doing stuff that, I just never thought socialists would do. The left increasingly is falling into a kind of identity crisis. And you see more and more fractures within the left, more and more attacks within the left, or attacks on people like Glenn Greenwald, who don't fit within a typical left-right divide. I mean, he's basically just a civil libertarian who found a platform on Fox, because you can't say those kinds of things on CNN or MSNBC. So the left is at a weaker point, I think, than ever before. And the impulse to gatekeep becomes stronger when your identity falls into crisis, because you have to tell people who you are. You have to push other people to signal their virtue. And you can start to see the relationship between this kind of political sort of nihilism or banality or sort of new bureaucracy and the emergence of the sort of culture war becoming the kind of living epitaph of that former leftist movement, that all that remains is this kind of moral stance of protecting the individual rights of sort of essentially wealthy individuals with a variety of formats of identity. It becomes another mode of division. Well, the left has gone through painful series of decades. I mean, Mikhail Gorbachev died yesterday, 92. He's the guy who basically ended the Soviet Union. And with the end of the Soviet Union, you saw the rise of a unipolar United States, and then all these policies of unchecked, unfettered transnational capitalism like NAFTA, which devastated the working class in the United States. Deunionization picked up massively because, the New Deal impulse was gone to kind of create a social democratic alternative to the USSR in the United States. And with the death or just, the controlled demolition of unions and offshoring of jobs, the left changed. The class character of the US left changed, and working people, who worked blue collar jobs, who did stuff with their hands, well, many of them just died due to the opioid genocide fueled by the Sackler family. Others just became really angry and went to the right and voted for Trump because they wanted to give the middle finger to the man. And the left was left with its base kind of in universities and grad school. And, their front line became people who were overeducated and underemployed with student debt, voting for Bernie. Bernie rolled over and went back into the Senate. I don't know where the left can go, but you have basically a left that has the character of a professional managerial class, a very professionalized activist left, not really that distinct from the class character that defines the base of the Democratic Party. I know this because I come from this. Okay. This is me. This is also a self-analysis. And so what do you hang on to define yourself as distinct from a more and more populist right? You can also say a pseudo-populist right that's taking up the mantle of issues that used to be considered left, like anti-war. Like, you have right-wingers. The only people in Congress who are voting against funding this insane proxy war in Ukraine are right-wingers. The only ones, literally.
Yeah.
They're the only ones opposing
no one,
the FBI,
no one made
in
our country, no one made a left-wing case for Brexit. No one made a case for what is the left-wing argument. It was an argument that Corbyn was clearly wanted to make, that was unable to make, because it was, again, the space had become inoculated from that kind of complexity couldn't be permitted. And like the aspect of the left that you have just described was formerly a component of the left, a necessary component, a professional intelligentsia, bourgeoisie, that in affiliation with the proletariat is gonna create a socialist movement. But as you say, with the extraction of the proletariat and the annihilation of with the abandonment of the working class, what you're left with is a kind of a perverted aspect of the left. And all I spoke to someone the other day, and they said that he said, I'm as disenchanted with anti-wokeness as I am wokeness. It's not like that we want to be anti-woke. All of those issues around identity, as a person who would have once been traditionally left, these are really, really important duties of anybody to ensure that people are represented and these conversations are had and people don't feel marginalized or ashamed of who they are, and that the complexity of what it is to be a human is something that continues to evolve and be respected. But the idea that that's all that remains, and it's extracted from economics, and that it's extracted from meaningful social change, and there is no means for alliance against the powerful interest that we've just spent the last hour talking about, means that you've got a left devoid of dynamism and left only with emblematic gestural politics, virtue signaling, as they call it.
Yeah, I actually haven't heard it put so well in a spontaneous fashion. That's exactly what I was kind of building up to, which is that.
Well, I thought I'd do a bit, Max. I mean, you've done so much legwork. I thought I'd pop in for a little bit.
Thanks for stopping in. I really have nothing to add.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, have a look at either of these two. They're both fantastic. Please turn on the notification bell. It really helps us. Subscribe to my mailing list so I can let you know about live events. We might be coming to America, and we'll only be able to tell you those dates on our mailing list. So please turn that on. More important than any of that, though, is that you please stay free.